We're back. And I realized that the earbud in didn't help at all, so I'm just having it out. I can edit it later to make it sound... I can't completely get rid of the wind, but I can make it sound better. Oh. You ready for some tonal whiplash, baby? So, yesterday we talked a lot about Hitman. And I don't really have much else to say. Yesterday, pretty much what I did was play Deadlock, which, God, update coming soon, big shit. Started playing this kind of neat game called Shady Part of Me. It's a bit of a straightforward little puzzle game where you swap with your shadow and you do stuff. Seems to be an interesting story so far. Anyway, that's not really what I'm here to talk about. Tonal whiplash. We're actually going to be talking about geopolitics, baby. Yeah, that's what we like to talk about. So, I don't know. I wanna give my little opinion on America, what America is doing versus other countries, and the dichotomy between an individual in relation to America as like a concept. So I want to clear the air here real quick. I consider myself a leftist in a very not quite Marxist way, because I don't really give a shit about Marx as a group identity collective, like Marxism. But I do respect a lot of Marx's writings about autonomy in relation to commodities and your work and that sort of thing. And a lot of work that is built off Marx, a lot of globalism type of ideas is very closely aligned to what I believe in. So I just want to clear the air here if that's the perspective I'm going to be trying to talk about. And the other thing I want to get clear, I'm on Twitter. I'm very online, so this is definitely, I'm a victim of the algorithm as much as anyone else. So I want to sort of clear the air here about kind of what I'm going to be yapping about for a while. There's this really annoying to me brand of discourse around whenever Trump does some extremely stupid shit when it comes to other kind of countries. It happens with Israel, Palestine, just recently happened with Venezuela, is currently happening with Greenland, of where people talk about action in a violent revolution sort of way to America, and from not American leftists. And then there's American leftists who are kind of freak out and are I don't know what to do, I'm so sorry, this shit sucks, what can we even do to help or whatnot. And I hate both of these people. I don't think either one is necessary. Okay, I don't think necessarily either one is coming from a bad place. I am distrustful of one a little more than the other, and that's the Foreigner one, and we'll get to that on why I believe that. I hate the idea that God. Okay. I'm trying to think of how to word this proper. So the idea that you as an individual are directly responsible, morally, individually culpable for your country is fucking batshit insane. Now, that doesn't mean in the same way that you have the same moral individual culpability to your country that you do to the human race. But you don't see people freaking out whenever someone else does something bad or a collective of people do something bad. There's this understanding, especially with the kill all men type of dialogue, where I am someone who tries to be a respectful, like equilibrium, autonomy, fulfilling, like feminist type of person. And so when people say like kill all men and talking about like male privilege and whatnot, I don't feel threatened about that, because I understand that like there's a system in play there, and I am not individually morally culpable for all men or whatnot. Now that doesn't mean that if like I see someone being a creep to a woman in public, that I don't try to do like I don't step in and try to stop that, or I don't advocate for women around me and whatnot. But there's this weird sense of and it's funny because we're going to get to this, individualized thinking of like personal responsibility, that it's very Western coded, which is ironic. I will speak more on that later. But in the same way that I am not morally culpable for all men, and therefore like, but that doesn't mean that it's okay for me to like stand by and just like watch shitty men do terrible things. Like the idea that I am morally individually culpable for like the concept of America as a country, or like half of the population that votes for Trump, is also batshit crazy. But that also doesn't mean that like I'm absolved of attempting to like make America a better place through like voting, protesting, dialogue, like even violence occasionally, if it would ever come to that. But even if so, it's not like my moral responsibility as an individual to do those things. It is just a part of the social construct that allows me to be involved in the human race, that I try to make these things better, even though like these are very complex, very large systems that an individual can't interact with. And therefore like this sort of Catholic sort of guilt about it doesn't make any fucking sense. And why I especially hate foreigners, and not all, and I can't stress enough this too, it's very much not an all foreigners thing. There are people who make very good critiques about America and the way our culture is and how it interacts. But there's a specific brand, and it's also really funny because they tend to be Western Europeaners, although they can be in any country, of people who just like really hate America, and they drape the language of why in a lot of real like kind of leftist coded, very anti-imperial speech. But and this is conjecture and a bit of a straw man, and I understand that, but these people aren't anti-imperial. They are just like giga nationalists. They like love their country. They hate that America is fucking with their country, and that's where their anti-imperial like sentiment comes from. But they don't actually give a shit what their country does necessarily, not to the same extent that America does. And I understand too, America is more powerful, which does make criticisms more levied and focused. And I don't think it's wrong to criticize America, but I want the criticisms to be like, not even good, but I want them to be productive in a way that can make America change for the better. And not just to actually, fuck it, not make America change for the better, but to make conditions for like people across the world better. Because my problem is that America isn't like they're doing sort of the like, there's a quote where it was like when Hitler died, like World War II, Adolf Hitler died, he became like a Jesus crucifixion for all the sins of white man in Europe. And instead of looking at Germany and like Hitler as byproducts of systems going on, mainly capitalist, nationalist systems going on, and they're treated as this like uniquely evil, sort of perverse like figures who doing this thing just for like greed or whatever, because they're like spiritually evil. And that sort of issue is currently happening to America, where America, partially because Trump is himself evil, which Adolf Hitler, very evil, but not in like a spiritually religious sort of like his soul is tainted. Evil in the sense of that, like, he's not, there's no like actual principles there to make like to try to help your fellow man. So it's evil in like I'm blanking on the term, not theoretical, teleological, is that the correct word? Where it's like a spiritual evil, not like a spiritual evil, but he's like utilitarian evil. He is someone who is a net negative, like, on the world and people around him. And Trump is evil in the same way. I think conversations about like spiritual evil or whatever are fucking useless in this kind of context. Again, especially if you're looking at like a material leftist sort of perspective. But what's happening is that, like, because he is so obviously utilitarian evil, and the Republican Party is fucking evil, and America itself is very utilitarianly, like, it's very apparent that they are negatives to the world, but people confuse negatives to the world with like looking at what's actually going on in a material sense. And so what happens is, like, America is sort of being Christ martyred as like the sin of imperialism, which is funny because, again, a lot of people who the current country we're talking about, like Greenland, owned by Denmark, bro, like maybe the goat of like colonialism, like right probably behind the UK, and the people in UK are also yapping about it, and it's like, what are we talking about here? Like, I've been seeing people who are like, yeah, me, a guy from Denmark, ain't it crazy how evil these imperial like Americans are or whatever? They should be protesting in the streets. And it's like, bitch, what do you think is, one, happened in Denmark that has led to the current good position like Scandinavia as a whole is in? And two, what do you think Denmark is currently doing? You think they're just like chilling? They're just like sitting around just like free trading with people? No, man, they're exploiting countries just the same. Like, there's this weird like call inside the house thing as well. And again, America is worse than Denmark, so it is fine for people to criticize America more than Denmark. But I don't know, I feel like there's a lack of self-awareness because they're not principled in that way. They don't actually care about anti-imperialism when it comes to their own country. It's only because America is fucking with their country that all of a sudden they need to drape it. Because there's only two ways to drape anti-imperial sentiment. There's like a leftist autonomy like sort of sentiment, or it's like giga right nationalist sentiment. But people know not to be giga right nationalist, either just through dialogue or because like they like gay people, you know, like, and so there's this weird, and this happens all the time with every issue. You see it a lot where like not materially based like feminists or people caring about like race issues or sometimes even class issues, despite being classism is a materially based thing, will talk about unique evils and like, I'm blanking on where I was going with this. Oh, yeah, sorry. Okay. They'll talk about issues that directly pertain them as if it's like a unique, like, God's plan sort of thing that needs to change and not a material condition for like a lot of people in similar positions. You see this with like famously like black men who are very misogynistic or whatever, where they have a tuned in idea of like the struggles to be black and like, and the economic issues that like portray around that and with it, and also like other societal issues that come with that. But all of a sudden they can't tune into it when it's about women who face similar issues, even if for slightly different reasons. And part of the reason they struggle with that is a lack of intersectionality. And the intersectionality tends to be based in pretty like material principles, about wanting to change systems to benefit like entire groups of minorities who are oppressed for not the same shallow reason, but like the same overall reason, which is like to uphold power in specific other groups. And the same thing is happening with the dialogue here. And so what I want to say with this is, like, I don't want people to not criticize America. I'm so serious. Like, fucking nuke the White House. I don't give a shit. Like, America, again, is so evil, and it deserves criticism. But I want people to criticize it for the correct reasons that don't just, like, for example, like, let America die or whatever, and then this China is now an imperial power. Because none of the actual systems surrounding it were even like addressed or pulled into like the conscious like zeitgeist, so it can be addressed in the future. I want America to die. I just don't want it to die as like a martyr to free other countries from their sins of like imperialism, colonialism, cycles of violence, exploitation, and whatnot. I want America to die whimpering, not as like a beacon for these other countries to put their sins on. I don't know. I hope that sentiment comes through, and I also cannot stress enough that the people I am criticizing on Twitter are not bad. Like, while I wish for them to be better, it's not like they're like Nazis or whatever. Like, they aren't the enemy, you know. Conservatism and reactionaries are like purely the enemy. Anytime talking about the sort of pseudo leftists I'm discussing is probably better spent on conservatives and reactionaries. And the reason I'm not, though, is because frankly I have nothing to say about conservative and reactionaries that really haven't been said. The only thing I feel that is like actually helpful is to get counter fucking Antifa, anti-fascists, like anti-Nazis, anti-reactionaries on as close to the same page as possible. That way you can actually like hand in hand ask some solid global policy changes, right? And like start actually dismantling systems. And because the reason for that, and this is the second point I wanted to talk about too, where it's like it's fucking, I can't stress enough how impossible it is to like overthrow a country. Now, have there been overthrows recently? Yes, but not like not in like real developed first world countries with strong globalist like national ties with other countries. It's like most of the countries that currently have revolutions and like regime changes and whatnot are like certain Southwest Asian countries, like Africa and South America, which is like the exploited countries from the Northern Hemisphere. And the reason for that is because they haven't had like a real secure material like source of comfort. I don't know if that's the right word, foundation to actually like maintain power or whatnot, which is what's needed, because that's the real divider on if you can or not. If you don't have a solid foundation of any sort of economic or national power, then the people really do have power, but the countries don't even get improved because they need to get the foundation for their people's lives to get better. And not that their lives don't somewhat get better, right? Like a weak president in weak economic times who isn't like a kill people in the streets dictator is obviously infinitely better than like a kill detractors in the streets dictator who also has economic issues. You know what I mean? Like one is obviously better than the other, but things won't materially change for these people until they're able to actually get power in some way. And mainly that power currently in the world comes through strong like trade ties with NATO and China and America, which is why people in those trade lines don't have the same regime struggles. Even like you'll have party switches maybe, but rarely like full regime changes and like coups and whatnot. Greece was the worst like economic like one of the worst economies in the world for a bit, had one of the worst economic crashes like across the board. And while there was a lot of changes they made in the country, like political party changes or whatnot, there wasn't like an actual like protest revolution coup in the country. And the reason why is because Greece was still strongly tied to everyone else. So they had that sort of cushion to not even like weather out the storm. There's just the conditions for a protest or revolution. Like your country has to be so desolate and lacking of hope that the idea of taking over something somewhere seems feasible. The problem, even like further though, is that this is harder to do. The one, just physically, the larger your country is, the stronger your the military is, if the military isn't the one performing the coup. And I think this is an important one too. This is like 3. How many sort of like sources of power are in a country? It's very easy to overthrow a single dictator. It is very difficult to like systematically overthrow like a parliament. It's not quite the same because the power is diluted to more individuals who are able to sort of grasp onto it when others can't, via like sentiment and whatnot. Which is why I want to like stress how impossible America is to actually have like meaningful like protests and whatnot. On a pure logistics standpoint, right? America is fucking huge. Like the equivalent of trying to overthrow America and like install like get rid of the president is trying to overthrow the entirety of Europe, or especially at least Western Europe, like the EU type countries. Which, if you were to tell people to like try to rise up and change like the EU in order to help like in order to you know enact positive changes that the EU could be doing, such as like helping other countries or like stopping the exploitation that Europe and like America has towards southern countries, you would generally be laughed at because the idea of trying to overthrow the EU seems like incredibly large, but like it's not really like compared to like trying to overthrow like China or America or whatever, or even like India. They are relatively like similar scopes of like craziness, but it's never thought about because we are one country. But the other problem, and this is what I was going to mention too, is that America is so good at diluting the power. Like, not only do you have the entirety of Congress and like the president himself might be easy enough to like overthrow or kill or something if like a lot of people got into DC or whatnot and the military didn't act, you could maybe do it. But the problem is that not only do you have Congress and the Judiciary Court that you would also have to overthrow, for the most part, you would also have to go and protest and overthrow like half of the sitting like U.S. governors. Like, of our 50 states, you would have to probably hit 20, 25 states, get rid of their Congress and governor. Each of those are like the size of a country in Europe, a little smaller, depending on the country, which again seems ridiculous. Like, I don't, especially when you look at history and revolutions that happen in history, where, like, man, it really becomes apparent that most revolutions occurred because another outside force, namely a country, was, like, helping them do it. Very rarely is there, like, actual grassroots independent uprising. It is almost exclusively, like, a uprising from a extremely desperate, disgruntled population with the help and assistance of other countries surrounding it, who will then end up kind of doing the same shit that was going on before. That's how they, like, kind of parasitically keep each other alive as well. In which, and again, dear God Lord, would I love if the president, judiciary court, 20 to 25, maybe plus governors, just got like a bullet in their head. Godspeed, FBI agent listening to this. I wish you would do it, Mr. FBI agent. You might have the access. But it's so logistically, like, it is maybe possible to, like, protest, overthrow, like, a big city. Like, maybe, like, a state capital, and not like the governor, I'm talking like the mayor. Maybe you could overthrow that. And even then, like, the amount of effort that would just go into overthrowing, like, a capital, especially when you start getting into the resistance type aspects of a military who supports reactionaries, like conservatives in thought, the police state, which is inherently conservative, as well as, like, a third of a country, which are, like, gun-happy people who are also conservative and would love to kill protesters. Like, you start, like, a military, by the way, this is also, like, that spends enough money on its budget that, like, equals the next, like, 10 countries combined. Like, it's such a... And again, I'm not saying this because I think it's, like, a bad idea or, like, shouldn't happen, but because it's such a unlikely outcome that there's almost no, like so much wasted lives and like manpower and connections and sorry, and, like, food and all that would go into this, and maybe not even, like, almost assuredly not even work, and then even if it did work, would, like, not really have sweeping effects across the country. I don't know. I just don't see how it is, like, the actual proper use of even, like, dialogue thought process. I think we are much better off just keep trying to like, advocate, like what we need is not a protest against conservatives. We need, like, a protest for Medicaid, you know, like universal health care. That's part of the problem of, like, yeah, that's where the true issue, I think, of leftist, like, grassroots movements occur. Is because, like, the actual proactive changes that would make the country better and make conservatives lose power aren't seen as protest targets. They're only seen as, like, voting policy targets. And I think the dialogue around that needs to change. Like, I don't think it's enough that we should try to vote for a candidate who might support universal health care. I think, like, the entire focus should be on, like, hey, like, we're going to vote for this person who might be good for universal health care, and then if they don't do it, then we riot in their capital or whatever, because it just looks bad. Like, it would hurt their career. They would likely be incentivized, not even from a moral standpoint, but just from, like, a financial standpoint, to actually vote for the good policies. And I think that's what the kind of protest revolutionary action, like, needs to happen in America. And by doing conservatives and reactionaries, and then therefore also cripple all the shit they uphold: patriarchy, white supremacy, imperialist thoughts, and whatnot. And that's why, in my opinion, a lot of the BLM movements don't actually are sort of struggle to accomplish stuff. And it's not because their demands are bad or anything, but they're not really striking at the material concerns of candidates running. And I will say they try to, and this is also a white liberal problem as well. People eased off on the BLM protests because Biden promised to abolish police and defund them and do all this other stuff that he didn't end up doing, because fuck Biden and God fuck the Democratic Party. But there was really no repercussion to that, which is a shame, because it is hard to protest stop meaningfully. There's this unfortunate idea, and it's kind of true, that change is slow and the government is slow, and that has sort of creeped its way into a lot of Americans' heads. So when there's protests in the street and then a candidate promises something, the tension eases off, and there's not immediately repercussion for not fulfilling, because they just sort of fall into well, I have to pass the bill through Congress, and then it has to go through the House, and then through the Senate, and then the President, and then it has to be deliberated on, and then the Supreme Courts have to approve it. Fuck that. So seriously, if a president wants to, if a party, even if they're a minority, if a president or party wants to, they could force a fucking bill through in a goddamn week. What needs to start happening is that protests need to start, and then the pressure needs to keep going until change occurs, which is hard, but it's doable. And I think that's where most of the criticism of Americans and a lot of the focus from leftists should try to be on is not starting all separate protests and whatnot, but getting a functioning good way of protesting which makes change via consistent actions and whatnot. I don't know. I hope I'm making sense. If anyone ever watches this, there's a comment section. If you wish to disagree or whatnot, I'd love to read it. There's a solid chance, depending on what part of this you disagreed with, that I think you're stupid. But I'll read it, and I'll probably respond. But I don't know. But then again, and this is all because I don't even get into, by the way, how actual solid leftism is nearly fucking impossible. First the Red Scare back in McCarthy era, but then post 9/11, the surveillance state we live in makes actual violent protests made by leftists and Antifa almost fucking impossible. You essentially need to look into it, which is also true for a lot of older, if you actually read leftist type of protests, where it's all the founding members met in college or some shit, and then they just kind of kept introducing friends and friends of friends or whatever. The same thing would kind of have to happen in America, where it's you can't just text online, be hey man, pulling up to the Antifa function, let's get saucy in this bitch. You would have to have pure luck odds of a bunch of college students or something else that would cause a bunch of tight-knit people to get together. Maybe a workers' union. Unlikely. Even in peak union times, workers didn't necessarily get along with each other. They just understood that there was a collective class interest, which kind of doesn't exist anymore. In the sense that people now big, like, it's something that people don't realize when they talk about unions as much as they were great back in like the 50s and 60s, is that on paper, like demographically, union members were very alike. Like, not that there was never women or people of color or queer people in those unions, there definitely was. But like most unions for like factory workers and auto workers and whatnot were in like a workplace, they were straight white men, because like this was still like pre-civil rights like movement. Same thing with like the fucking second wave feminism type of deal, where most like blue collar workplaces were still predominantly white and straight and like kind of not wealthy, but like they were all very similar ideology wise, which is not really the case today. Unions today require a much more intersectional approach to work properly, which is why talking about intersectionality and reading about it is so important and is forgotten a lot in a lot of these talks about unionizations, which is also something else that a lot of other like people in foreign countries don't get, because intersectionality is not as important there, because like they're just demographically like less diverse. It's not as big of a consideration. A reason why a lot of like the Scandinavian countries and Western Europe can be so unionized with like so much less like pressure and struggle is, one, because they're much smaller in scope, but two, because they're also much more homogenous, and it's a lot easier to get like a collective going of people, like the more they have in common. And it's not impossible to do otherwise. You just need to know like what you're doing and what you're talking about and what are actually the issues, which is why like education is so important. And why I like, my criticism isn't of individuals in this thing. Like, it's not the people on Twitter, it's the conversation they're having, because the conversation isn't, in my opinion, beneficial, because there's like strong sections of groundwork, foundational like philosophical ideas and material understandings missing from the conversation that makes it not productive. Yeah, I don't know. This is something that, like, this is a very complex topic that I could talk about myself, much less if anyone else was to talk about, for many hours, and also probably in better ways. But I don't know. This is a stream of consciousness, just general thoughts about where America is at, and what I think leftist conversation around it kind of needs to be. And so if I ever make a video of this, there'd probably be like a lot of footnotes or cuts or whatnot of me chiming in to clear some stuff up. But I don't know. Read more. It's so important to read from people you don't normally either consider or even like respect necessarily. You just need to just read more. If you're just like a straight white person from Denmark, or even just like a gay white person from Denmark, who cares? Who really want to try to understand what is going on in America, I cannot stress enough where you just need to go and read like black Marxist writings and feminist writings from the last 5-10 years. I think it will clear a lot up and make it better suited to just have conversations even online, in more productive ways that would maybe even help like really stupid Americans who also need to read more know what they can do better, even if it's just spreading knowledge and like the sort of framework of how to approach it. Just even the spreading that makes it more likely to happen, which I don't know. I think we're sort of in the, that's what really sucks is we're just in the extreme baby steps of this sort of thing. And the American government and every rich person in the world is putting every asset they have to not let those ideas spread. Which is why it's ever more important than ever to kind of try to spread the right ideas about intersectionality and materialism. And so we can actually like start enacting good change in the world from like a utilitarian point of view. Anyway, thanks for watching. I'm home. The car drive is over. This was episode 2. Hopefully tomorrow's episode is more lighthearted, I guess. I don't know. I think this is important. Thanks for watching. Bye-bye.